start with the announcement of the minimum wage increasing this week by 5.2%. Many, of course, have welcomed this news. However, we're hearing that some farmers are warning prices of meat, fruit and vegetables could go up. Today we're talking about strawberries. However, the profits are not going to the farmers. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is a worrying development, and what we're seeing is that farmers are being asked to absorb much of this, and much by supermarkets. And in fact, I've actually only heard yesterday that some of the supermarkets are adding onto their gross profit a couple of percent just to take advantage of the current situations, which is not just exacerbated by wages, it's also by the recent flooding that's meant that we haven't got the supply that's put pressure on prices. And so supermarkets are running right with this, and it's important that the ACCC, who really have been a toothless tiger, get into the thrux of this matter and get underneath the bonnet of the market to make sure that farmers are being protected, but also consumers are being protected. It's also been exacerbated by the fact that we have a shortage of labour on the ground. And when the Labor Party, when they came to government, abandoned the ag visa, what that meant is that it's put a constraint on the labour supply into agriculture. And while the minimum wage has gone up, in many farms already they're paying well above it because they have to get their crops off, such as the competitive nature. But what Labor has done has removed that availability of a different labour supply. And while Anthony Albanese only yesterday came out and said he wants to expedite the visas for construction workers, but won't look after the agricultural sector, Australian consumers need to look at the prices that they're paying at the supermarket and say that it's not just the supermarkets, it's also Anthony Albanese that is putting this price squeeze on them at the supermarket because of his policy driven by the AWU not to allow the ag visa to continue. And this is a diabolical situation that's adding to our inflation pressures, and Australian consumers are going to continue to pay at the checkout because of the short-sightedness of the Labor government predicated by what the AWU are saying.
What do you think a good alternative to the ag visa program is then if Labor's not wanting to have that on board? I'm hearing from many farmers across the country a possible alternative in their wish list would be to get more workers on the farms but have visas in terms of like more permanent visas so they could have their families stay there rather than just a few years in Australia and then back home.
Yeah, I think we need to look at all of it, and I think we also need to be pragmatic and look at grey nomads and say, well, if the grey nomads are out there and they're on a pension, do we look at the hours that they can work before their pension's impacted if they work in agriculture, if they work in specific industries? And so we're being pragmatic. We're disappointed that the Labor Party's moved away from the ag visa, but if there's grey nomads running around the country that can pick up a bit of work as they travel around and not impact their pension payments, well, why wouldn't we look at that? But we were trying to have a long-term structural change because it's not just about unskilled workers. This is the thing about the ag visa. It was about skilled and semi-skilled workers. And the problem we've got is what Labor want to do is just say, let's have the Pacific scheme, which is just tying a little bow around what we've already got in place. And it doesn't go to skilled and semi-skilled workers. So this is a real crunch, and that we're going to feel at the checkout unless there's some real action. And if they want to take away the availability of the ag visa workers, then we need to look at what else we can do. But we also need to understand that it will take time for farmers to get their crops back in after the floods, and that the wages that are being paid aren't being absorbed by farmers. And this is where the ACCC need to stand up. They've been missing in action for many, many years when it comes to agriculture, and I think they've been just short of diabolical for agriculture. They've been a real disappointment, and they need to get under the bonnet of this and make sure there's real transparency, not just for farmers, but it's also for consumers.
How long do you think we're going to have to be paying for these prices, these increased prices for certain produce? And what is the latest with the backpacker situation? How soon will we start to see more people coming into the country?
Yeah, look, just before the election, ABARES gave me advice that they thought there was probably at least 6 months. And in fact, when you looked at some of the inflationary pressures that were coming from increased food prices, is that it was probably 6 months, such as the production cycle to get crops in and get them harvested. So it is important to understand that, and so we need to work through that. But we've got to understand that Backpackers aren't coming back tomorrow. It's going to take some time. Before COVID hit, there was about 150,000 backpackers in this country. We were down to under 30,000 before the election, and there's no real change in terms of numbers, in significant uplift that we're going to see. This is going to be a slow burn, and that's why the ag visa was important. It was a structural change away from transient workforce to one that we were giving a pathway to permanent residency. We're saying let's bring in the next generation of migrants that are going to grow regional Australia, grow agriculture, live out in regional Australia, not just pass through. And this is why it's important to understand that backpackers are some time off. It's not going to happen overnight. It's probably going to take at least 12, 18 months at least before backpackers of any scale are going to start coming back once there's confidence in borders, once there's confidence at the end of COVID. It's not just going to happen overnight. And this is why this has been a small-sided look at this by the Labor Party in walking away from the ag visa and simply saying they have no other solution than the Pacific scheme that we already have in place now.